As a student, the hardest challenge I had to face was making rocks. And inside Substance Designer, that is super hard. And today is one of the biggest issues my students have. Back in the day, I have a few tutorials on how to make rocks, but they weren't really useful. So today I want to give you a 5-part masterclass in rock creation, where you're gonna learn how to do rocks like the ones you're seeing now on screen. So let's get started. Part 1 is basic rock sculpting. If we really want to know how to create rocks in, say, Substance Designer, we need to learn the really basics of Substance Designer height creation. And for that, we're gonna do a little summary of the things that you should know before starting. As a student, I didn't know these things, and because of that, I have a really hard time trying to figure out how to make rocks or other shapes and even trim sheets. So learning this will make you more independent when working in Substance Designer for your own personal projects. Now, in your height map, every single pixel will have a value. If the value is 0, then the pixel is going to be black. That means that there's no height information at all, there's nothing. But if the pixel is of color white, then the value is 1, and that means that you are at the highest point of your height map. When you want to create a gradient in Substance Designer, what you do is a set of pixels that have different values between each other, making kind of like a curve that gives us that smooth edge that we see. When creating rocks, it's super important that we avoid having sudden changes in our height, meaning that we go from 0 to 1. If not, the edges of our shape are going to be too sharp. So let's take a look at what I'm speaking about. In here we have a shape dot, and I'm going to change this into a disk. Now, if you click on this icon here in our 2D view, you're going to see that now we have this tab with a lot of information. In here we have the dark area that is black and value of 0, and if we have in here, you see everything changed to 1, being the value white. So I'm gonna close this, and we want to avoid this, the sharp edge. Now if we get this into a normal map and we increase the intensity to 3 or 5 even, you're gonna see that this is just a line. However, if we use a non-uniform blur, you're gonna see that the shape is gonna change a lot, even like this. Now these artifacts, don't worry, it's because we need to increase the samples, but you can now see that the transition between the bottom part and the top part is actually quite big, making the shape look more smooth and round on the edges. This is gonna be super important for later because, believe it or not, we need a little bit of a smoothness in our stones to make it blend with the dirt or any other surface that we have under our stones. As a student, it's really easy to kind of miss these details. That's why we are mentioning in here, because they might do a big change between how your rocks are looking, if they look integrated into your material or not. Now this is not a rock, and of course it's just for testing, but everything you're gonna see up next, I will suggest you that do not copy it as I did. Try to look for an answer or different ways of changing what I do to get a different result. And the reason for that is the following. When I was a student, I was going over tutorials, I used to actually follow step-by-step tutorials. So when I was doing my materials, I actually started doing the same on the tutorials, and I used the same system of rocks for every kind of surface that needed rocks. That means that it doesn't matter what environment I was using the same rocks in my materials. And that is actually wrong, and it's costing you a lot of details and sense in your material. What I was missing back then that you are missing right now is that your rocks will take the shape of the nature that has around them. Now, it will depend on your reference, but most importantly, it will depend on the environment your material is. If you take a look to these images, you're gonna see that they are all different. They are all rocks, but they look different. The reason for this is because of erosion. So these rocks, for example, have a more round shape. The reason they have a more round shape is because these rocks are from actually a river, and the water goes around them and gives them their shape. Now, this second image has a different shape, and that's because of the wind. The wind has eroded this in a way that it gave it that specific shape that you see here. Every rock is unique depending on the environment they are working on, and that's your job as a material artist to figure out and to understand that the surfaces that are going to be inside an environment tell the whole story of what you are trying to achieve. And now that you understand this, we're going to move forward and see 4 ways you can create rocks inside Substance Designer, from the easiest way to the hardest of all, getting the best result you can have. Part 2 of the rock masterclass is procedural rock generation. So we're going to start to create our own stone generators being procedural. So this is something many of you may know already because it has been going around for a long time, but I wanted to go over every single detail of it. So we're going to start with a disc shape having an amount of 10 by 10. You can change that there as ever you want. And then I'm going to start to add a little bit of insert size here and here with a value of 1 in randomness. See, I want to have different shapes because later we're going to go into rotation random and rotate it. If the shape is a disc and we rotate it, we are not going to see a difference. So this is really important. Now we're going to set the scale random around 0.63 and lower the scale to 0.1. We really need small circles. We don't need big shapes. Then we're going to go and do position random and set the mode to max. Once that is done, you're going to increase the luminance random to 0.5. And from here, we're going to create a distance node. Now this node feels like magic because as a student, I use it all the time, but I didn't understand how it works. So let me show you a little demonstration. You're going to change this to only source, having these sharp shapes. So what is the function of the distance node? Well, the function is actually that it's going to identify every shape that has a grayscale value over, I think it was 0.3 or 0.2. I'm not sure, but you can check on the Substance documentation in the link I'm going to leave in the description. And once it has identified those shapes, it's going to start to expand those shapes based on our maximum distance. Now, this shape will expand until in all directions until they collide with another shape. When they collide with another shape, they will stop expanding in that direction. See how now that they have touching here, they're not going to move more in there, but they will move around this area. So you want to pull this at maximum value. Once you have this, you want to go for an edge detect. Now, this is what many people do. I have some extra steps in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of deformation, organic deformation in here. Now, many people actually do this around here after the edge detect, and what usually happens is that they deform the shape too much that you start to see artifacts in the stones that you are building. So instead of doing it here, we are going to be doing it in this area, in between the distance and the edge detect. Yeah, so we're going to get some of these shapes, and we're also going to get a warp node, put it in here, and get the clouds too into a blur. Yes, we want it to be soft. And you're gonna see the destruction here as well. You can increase this as well, no problem. Watch out with these noises. Now, once you have the right value, you can just connect this to the edge detect and you're gonna have different shapes compared to what it was before. Now they have changed a lot. Now from here, you want to do the usually flat fill system. So we're gonna get the flat fill and then a flat fill to random grayscale. The flat fill node identifies every shape that has at least 1 pixel of distance between each other. So what is it that many of my students have a problem with is that they're having a shape, a pattern like this, but they need a small bevel and they want to get some mask. So they kind of get something like this, get into a flat fill, and so far it looks good. But when they start increasing this, they start to get these kind of colors and shapes, or they start to blend too much. That's because there's not enough space between shapes. And in order to fix this, what you can do is actually get from here, yes, a threshold node that is going to give you a more specific mask of what you want to have. See? And you can connect it to the flat fill, allowing you to then keep on working. So I'm going to delete this now and I'm going to keep up with the flat fill. I was not going to use the random grayscale, that's my bad. I was going to use the flat fill to gradient and I was going to set the angle variation to 1. Once you've done that, you want to duplicate this node 4 times and change the random seed in each of them. Once you have this, you want to blend all this information with the mean value. The mean value is going to actually get the lowest value of each pixel. So you are removing the highest value and keeping only the lowest of each pixel of your image, basically. Yeah, this is a good explanation of how it works. And it's how it's gonna always work. It's kind of math in there. So once you have these, most people just stop here. And that's kind of alright. I mean, if you want to stop here, you can stop here. Now, I like adding more details to these kind of rocks. If I were to pull this into a normal map, it's gonna happen something that we were talking before, and is that the transition is too sharp, and we want to avoid this transition. Now, some people use a bevel to kind of like soft this out. I don't like using a bevel. I like using a small blur, yeah, to remove a little bit of that area. Let's do 0.1 in this case. Yes, it's gonna give us kind of like a bevel, and then it's gonna give us space to actually use a levels, which is gonna be kind of like an auto levels, and then pull this back a little bit, having less of a sharp edge in there. Now that you have this, what other thing you can do is create a cells pattern. The cells 1 pattern is a great friend for when we want to create these kind of rocks. And if we invert this and then use a blend mode, set the previous as a mask, you're gonna see that now we are kind of like sculpting our shapes, and we can set this to mean as well, and it's actually sculpting all of our shapes as you see here. So you can choose how much you want them to sculpt, or you can even use a directional warp or a non-uniform warp to make these lines move around the shape of your stones, so they kind of like work with them as well, making them feel more organic and realistic. Now, this is one of the easiest stone generations you are gonna find, and the reason I say easiest as well is because it's actually everywhere. Any tutorial you're gonna go over rock generation, this is the technique you're gonna go over, maybe with a little changes like I did just now, but it's gonna be exactly the same. However, I need you to remember this really well because you're gonna be using part of this process in the last step to generate these stones you see on screen. This is one of 3 secrets to make the last step. So let's go to part 3, rock creation, but for walls. Now, for this part, we have a really special occasion. This generator that you're seeing right now on screen is basically something I had to build for an art test that I passed for a really big studio. Now, I can't say which studio or what was the actual art test in general, but I can show you at least this part so you can see and learn from here. Now, in order to understand this, you need to understand why I did it this way. And the reason I did it this way is because I wanted to be original in my own way. And this is something that I see that many of my students are lacking right now, and many other new beginners in Substance Designer. As I said before, beginners usually have this tendency or are really used to copying exactly what they see in their tutorials and then getting that into every single material. What you are missing, and many of my students are also missing, and I teach them to kind of break that, is originality. And that means use your tutorial not to copy them, but to inspire yourself to do something new with the same basis. When you manage to do something more original instead, you're gonna find yourself creating something more powerful and innovating. And it's gonna call more the attention of any other studio because it's showing that you are having problem-solving skills. Now, here's a small example of one of my students that managed to get a job after our mentorship and actually did a great job with the artwork. Sam decided to build a marble trim sheet, but she was super original on the way she solved it, even though I was helping her. It was always looking for what things could be better on what I teach her, or what things could have been done different. Even her presentation stand out from other students, where she actually saw what other professionals were doing and tried to go in the same direction. Now, that's the power of breaking down what you learn to make something new. So let's see how this can help you to make a really nice and interesting brick wall. So for this specific situation, we are using here 2 specific notes from Daniel Tiger. I'm gonna try to leave the link in the description if they are still on store on Artstation, but I'm gonna show you also how to do this without these notes. So in here, what I did is I tried to achieve a wall where my lower stones were bigger than my top ones. So I did something really simple. I used a tile random generator to get these shapes. I'm setting this to 8 by 15 to get the right shape of the stone with a pattern of square. Then I set my random size in X and Y by half and increase my scale so that every single shape was touching with each other. From here, I set the offset random to 0.78 and set the color random to 0.49. As you can see, this is really not different from a cells pattern, and yet it's super useful. Now, the trick here was actually masking. I know that there's a easier way of doing this now, but at the moment I was doing this, it was not possible. What you can do right now is actually get this in here, and we're gonna remove these areas, connect the distance node, and once you have this, you can choose the cropping area you want to move. So you're gonna be avoiding using all of these nodes, connect this here, and still get the result that you want to. As you can see, it's working really fine. So I'm gonna remove this actually. Now, for the second tile generator that you see here, I actually changed some values to make it look smaller, in particular the X and Y amount. The rest are more or less the same. I changed the tiling so they look actually quite small. Now, once we have this, I used these 2 notes from Daniel Tiger, but actually, as I told you before, this is just a reinterpretation of something that I already knew. So if I go back, for example, to this area, and I copy all of this here and paste it here, you're gonna see that now, if I replace this, I'm gonna get something similar. Now, of course, it's not the same because in here I need to change this, but I am already to a good start and I can keep working with this as I did before. So I'm gonna go here and place this. Again, this is something many students lack, and as a beginner it's hard to maybe to understand that what you need is not to copy what others are doing, but inspire yourself to do something new and better. So we're gonna actually give it a look, yeah, and I'm gonna try to see what are the things or the core parts. So in here we have the cell pattern generation. In here is done differently. Yeah. So in here we actually use a tile generator at a distance. In here we just use tile randoms and a distance node to make sure that there's no negative space between the shapes. Then we use a blend node to mix all of this together. Now the rest, again, it's just the same over and over. We're using the same process. The only thing is I have all of these processes inside a single node. And I also have my warp variation in here. The solid tweaker is basically something like that, but in a different way. I don't want to say that what I did was exactly the same as Daniel Tiger because I have no clue what's inside this node. I never tried to replicate it, but if you have the guts to do it, go ahead and please share with me in the comments how it looks. Now part 3 might have been a little bit expressed in Substance Designer, but part 4 is gonna actually help you do some better work, although I don't really like how this works. Part 4 has one of the methods I really do not enjoy, and that is unique rock sculpting, meaning we are gonna be sculpting each individual rock and then place it into a tile generator to generate a new scattering. So as I have just said, this method requires us to really focus on the sculpting of the individual rocks and then plugging all of these into another node to scatter them around. This might be something that I don't like, however, it may be the best way of doing it. Why? Because it allows you to focus on different steps consciously and do the best job you can in there. Another advantage of this is that we can easily control shape size and placement by using other images. And for ground surfaces, this is the best. So let's take a look at how this works and how you can do it. So in here you have my 4 rocks. And as you can see, I'm using a tile sampler at the beginning. I'm going to be using a paraboloid with a value of 2x2. I want these 4 images to be here. Now I'm going to get a cells pattern 1 after, of course, generating the adequate shape variation using size random in Y and scale random, and also some rotation random. And I'm gonna get a cells 1 with a scale of 5, and I change here the output size. Now this is something that many people don't do it. I include myself in many situations because we forget that this area actually exists and that we can interact with it. Like 90% of the time, I don't even look to the base parameters, and I know that most probably you too. So see how by changing the height to a negative value, we actually changed the canvas and shape these images have. Now we're gonna use this to help us abstract and generate these lines here. So you can see how they are looking, but we want a value of 0.55. We don't gonna go higher than that. So in here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start sculpting. And as I was showing you before, I'm using a threshold to get an exact mask of this, and then a flat fill to get a flat fill to gradient in angle variation in both, and only one random shape change. The reason we're doing this is because you don't want your random angle to be actually the creator of your rocks. You want to have your main rocks be sculpted by this angle random. And as you can see, it gives a more organic result, removing different areas. See, it gives us more kind of like a stylized shape already in your height map. So how do we use these stones? This is a node that, again, many students are really liking to use, and it's because many of the times they don't really know where to use it, and I can understand you completely. Happened the same to me. But in here, this is going to be the best place. Why? Because you have 4 shapes in this image. You can get the crop grayscale, move this around, try to center this, and once you have this center, you start to move around, and you can see that the section of the square is matching the section where the rock is, and it's actually in the middle of my image. So I can keep on doing this and going for section to section, as you can see here, to get all of my rocks on place. Once we have this, we are gonna scatter them, and we're gonna see something really fun of this. We're gonna get the tile generator in here, or sorry, not the tile generator. We're gonna do the tile sampler because we want to have the best tool for scattering in this case, and we're gonna do pattern input and set this to 4. Now we're gonna input all of our shapes, and if you want, you can give it a try and see if instead of using the tile sampler, you can use the tile generator to be a little bit more optimized with your time and computer, most probably. Now, once we have this, all of our rocks, but let's look at something. The tile sampler has down here a lot of inputs. What we're going to be looking into is going to be scale map input, rotation map input, and mask map input. So I'm going to get here a purling noise, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it really big, then use the levels, auto levels to make this area darker, then do something like this. See, I want some really marked shapes in here. See, now I'm gonna get the scale map input here and the mask map input first. So now that I have this, there's actually no change, but if I were to come here and change the scale map multiplier, you're gonna see that the places where this is black, the stones are smaller. Same way that if I go down to the bottom and I go to mask map threshold, start using this mask, you're gonna see how the stones inside the dark area start to disappear. And not all the stones disappear at once. You know why? Because there's a small gradient in here. As you can see here, there's a small gradient. Go back in here and start lowering this down, you're gonna see that the stones start to appear here. Now, why do we care about this so much? Because we can actually use this to generate a lot of scattering. So now, for example, I'm gonna change this again. See how I'm changing the scatter now? And I'm also gonna do a little bit of mask map just to remove some of them. Again, another example, let's use the Gaussian spots. Let's see if this works actually. Kind of works, maybe too small amount of information, but yet this is something really useful that is going to allow you to do the scattering more natural in every single part of your material. So now I think it's time that we stop doing these individual classes and move to something more interesting, like for example these rocks you're seeing. Meaning we are starting with part 5, and it is combined rock creation. This is one of the best approaches I was able to put together for you to create the stones that you were looking in the render before. However, I want to test you in something. I already gave you 3 clues of what we're going to be doing now. In part 2, I told you that technique was actually really important and that we were going to be using it later. In part 3, I told you the importance of actually being original and blending different things. And in part 4, you actually learn a small secret that we're going to be using now to generate the stones. So let's get to it right now. So this is the material I've been working on. As you can see, the rocks feel really organic, and in here you can really appreciate them quite a lot. Now we're going to go over a lot of things in here. The tutorial is going to be a little longer than you expected, but the reason for that is because I really want you to understand the complexity of this. So the first thing we went over was actually creating in here our own height map for the dirt, and we combined this with scan data. So why did we combine scan data with this, and why didn't we actually just use the scan data? So using scan data might hurt your portfolio, and there's a specific reason for that. When studios are looking for material artists, they don't look for someone that can use something that is already done. They look for someone that can take the tools that he has around him and make something even better. So when you are using scan data, and I recommend all of my students to do this when they are learning material art, is try to make most of, like 90% of the material should be yours, and the rest you can use scan data to make it better. For example, we did this with dirt because we know there's no chance that by using only Substance Designer we're gonna get exactly all the details that dirt should have, and yet we actually managed to get something really good with the help of the scan data from Quixel. So in here we're using a Perlin noise, and we are blending this with another Perlin noise that is having a non-uniform directional warp. You can see that the shape is actually not changing, but what we are looking is for height variation. We did a slow blur to inflate a little bit the shapes, and then we keep on adding and subtracting areas to create our own version. Now in here we actually blend the height map from our scan material with the one that we created. So as you can see here, we are multiplying. This allows us to keep some areas on the high part that we decide here, while others being a little bit under it below. Now, in order for this to work, we had to actually blend normal information. So how do you blend normal information with scan data? That's a really big question. The big question here comes like this. You have your own normal map, yes, with all of the information. Now, the height map you blend here doesn't have much detail, to be honest. So you want to get the normal map from your scan data. You want to invert this because it's in a different normal format, and you want to change the green format. We increase a little bit the normal intensity in here. You can play a little bit with this if you want. In our case, it was a little bit necessary, and we made a small blur to remove some sharpness. From there, we use a normal blend to actually put the normal map in the areas we want by using a mask. And this mask has subtracted all the other things that are on top of the dirt, meaning stones and foliage. Now to the interesting part. How did we do the rocks? So the process to creating rocks was actually quite simple because it's a combination of what you have seen before. So we're going to start with this simple and old tile generator with a value of 60 by 60, random scale in all the parameters, offset random, position random, and rotation random with luminance random as well. From there, we're gonna get a distance node, a little bit of warping, and then an edge detector to generate these shapes. As you can see here, I'm not using any kind of round edges, and that's because we are talking about kind of like a desert ground, so stones are more sharp than rounded. After that, we did a small blur, but what is really interesting is what we do next. So I got a cells 1 pattern, tiled by 84 because it was actually quite big, and then changed the output side, exactly what we have done in this area here. So it's actually this process, but has been changed. Instead of changing the height, we're changing the width, and we are subtracting that to our rocks, making these really small shapes. Now we'll use our levels to pull this up. We could have also used an auto levels, but we didn't want that much strength, and we use a flat fill to do exactly the same. Start sculpting our shapes from this to this, and finally this. Now from here, I start adding a little bit of surface detail. Again, I use a cells 1 pattern with an invert grayscale, but instead of using a directional warp, I use a non-uniform direction warp, and you have to start using this node. Now this is the smallest version of the stones, but I have the biggest one here, and I want to show you how this actually affects what you're doing. So this is how the cells pattern look by itself, and this is how the cells pattern looks after a non-uniform directional warp has been applied with the actual shapes of the stones. And in here, you can really see how that detail we are applying, it's been super useful. I can really increase this up, and it's gonna give it kind of like a lunar or kind of like rocky feeling to it, and it feels really organic and good. Now the secret is to do this as subtle detail. You shouldn't add it to more. And again, as beginners, it happens a lot that when you discover details like these that are really good, you actually start increasing this a lot. Now, I used to do the same, and because of that, I never understood why my materials weren't looking that good or why people didn't like what I built, because I was actually doing the same I saw in tutorials. So once again, don't just copy what I do. Try to play around, try to see what you're doing, if it's working for you, or it might work for another situation. And if it doesn't work, try to see what part works and change what doesn't to something that could be useful for you. So we're gonna follow on the big stones. So once we had this in here, I actually started adding surface detail. I got again a cells 1 pattern with a directional warp and a clouds 2, and then I use a slow blur to create some of these kind of like cracky areas and a little bit of layering for my stone. By blurring them, I subtracted to my rocks, making these areas you see in here, kind of like the rocky area. After that, I use again the non-uniform directional warp to create a little bit of surface detail, where some areas are going to be quite strong, but others are not going to be that strong. Now the big question, how did we scatter this if we're not using a tile sampler, and why does it work to us as well? The reason this works really well is because of the size scale that our images has. Here you see a small map I created with mask of all the stones in the first layer. So if I go in here after we finish with the details, yes, and you can see that the smaller shapes do have this detail, my bad. What I did here was I actually blend them, and I blend them using a splatter. See, I use a splatter that if you go to the grid number, yes, you're going to be able to change this. So usually you will have your grid number to 3, but you can lower this a lot to make them bigger. So I blend them together and into a max lighten so that the smallest stones keep themselves under the bigger stones. Now from this one, I actually took another splatter and make even smaller stones. And to these smaller stones, I subtracted the medium one. Now this is something I do with all my stones. So if I have small, medium, and big, that's usually what I'm going to have for my scattering, the small stones are going to be subtracted from the position of the medium and the medium from the small. That way, the small is not on top of the medium and the medium is not on top of the big ones. So the first thing I blended was the small stones. Yeah, in here you can see with high blend. The reason we did the small stones first is because of the term of layering. When we talk about layering in material art, we talk about the different features your material has and where they positioned based on their height. So the lowest layer you're gonna have is the lowest height on your map. The highest point on your height map is gonna be the top layer you're building. So we started with the small stones. From there we go with these medium stones, yes, that are the ones that we were building here. You can see I even use a small perling noise to play a little bit with the actual height distribution. And then we included the big stones that, as you can see, they are the highest one. Now making these stones the way I did it is not just gonna cut for you. There's two reasons why this also works really well. One of the main reasons is because we have foliage, and that's our third element or layer in our material, something different that adds value to our material, and it's big enough to call for your attention without having to distract you that much from what you were doing before. Now, in my case, I didn't use my foliage. This is from a generator I downloaded from Daniel Tiger, as you can see, and I was using it as a scatter. Now, the other thing that makes this material really good is the render. These kind of renders are my own brand, are my own way of making the renders, and is using high intensity lights with soft edges and high contrast with really dark shadows. Now, I added a mannequin in there, and you can see it in this image, and the mannequin is help you understand the scaling of the things that are on the scene. All of this together makes a great material, and the reason I'm telling you is because most of the times when I was making materials as a student, I tend to do a lot of work in Substance Designer, but when I went to rendering, I just did a sphere render that looked horrible with the lighting I was using. All the hard work I was putting in Substance Designer has now gone down the drain, and the reason for that is because presentation is 90% of the work, and I need you to understand this because your work doesn't finish in Substance Designer, it keeps on going. And if you need help with that presentation, I have two free resources for you. The first one is one of our latest tutorials on Marmoset to Block 4 to create renders using ray tracing, and instead of using a sphere, we're going to be using a plane, making something more dynamic like what you have in screen right now. Another free resource I have for you is our free Discord community. It's full of professionals and students that are working together to build a better future and community where all material artists are together and feel supported by each other. We know that you might feel alone because we also felt alone before, but we are here for you, so don't hesitate. And you can check the description of the video to join us with the link. I'll see you there. Everyone is waiting for you. Till next time.